Saint Genevieve was born in Nanterre, near Paris, around the year 422, in a Gaul still under the rule of the Roman Empire. The daughter of devout Christian parents, she demonstrated great piety and a deep love for God from an early age. Her father, Severus, was a wealthy man, and her mother, Gerontia, was known for her virtue. From a young age, Genevieve was marked by a special grace. It is said that as a child, she met Saint Germanus of Auxerre, who was in Nanterre on a mission to combat the heresy of Pelagianism. He recognized in her a divine calling and blessed the young girl, prophesying that her life would be dedicated to serving God. Inspired by the words of Saint Germanus, Genevieve consecrated herself to God in her youth, committing to live in chastity and prayer. Her spirituality impressed everyone around her, becoming an example of virtue even at a tender age. Her devotion grew as she faced daily challenges. After her parents' death, Genevieve moved to Paris, where she lived under the protection of a godmother. There, she devoted herself to fasting, prayer, and works of charity. Although she lived in the world, her soul was already deeply united with God, and her life was marked by simplicity and zeal for the faith. During this period, the Roman Empire faced great difficulties with barbarian invasions and political instability. The situation in Gaul was particularly delicate, with the Huns led by Attila approaching the region. It was in this context that Genevieve emerged as a pillar of hope and faith. Genevieve became known for her fervent prayers and her ability to inspire courage in people. In Paris, she stood out for organizing the community to resist adversities, often assuming the role of spiritual and moral leader. Her presence conveyed serenity and strength. When the threat of the Huns became imminent, many residents of Paris prepared to abandon the city. However, Genevieve exhorted them to trust in divine protection and to stand firm. She promised to pray incessantly for the city and encouraged the Parisians to do the same. Her trust in God proved decisive. While Genevieve and other Christians prayed fervently, Attila and his armies diverted their route and did not attack Paris. This episode solidified her reputation as a woman of prayer and a powerful intercessor, seen by many as a messenger of God. From that moment, Genevieve became a reference figure in Paris. Her spiritual leadership was recognized by both the rich and the poor, and she dedicated herself to caring for the sick, feeding the hungry, and consoling the afflicted. Her charity was driven by a deep love for others and the pursuit of divine glory. Genevieve also played an important role in the construction of churches in Paris. Inspired by her devotion to Saint Denis, the patron saint of the city, she promoted the building of a basilica in his honor. She believed that temples dedicated to God were a spiritual refuge for the faithful. Despite her piety and the many graces she received, Genevieve faced opposition. Some people accused her of deceit and mocked her faith, considering her a fanatic. However, she endured these criticisms with patience and offered her tribulations as a sacrifice to God. Her strength in the face of slander impressed everyone. Genevieve never retaliated with evil, preferring silence and prayer. She knew that her testimony of faith was worth more than any word, and her humility touched even the hardest of hearts. Over the years, Genevieve continued to attract followers and to consolidate her reputation as a holy woman. Her life was entirely devoted to God, and she did everything in her power to alleviate the suffering of others, especially in times of crisis. During a famine that ravaged Paris, Genevieve again demonstrated her leadership and compassion. She organized caravans to seek food in other regions and ensured that the needy received assistance. Her courage and determination saved countless lives. Although she lived in an era of uncertainties, Genevieve never lost hope. She firmly believed that God was in control of everything and that prayer could transform even the most difficult situations. Her faith was a source of inspiration for everyone around her. Genevieve was also known for her devotion to the Virgin Mary. Frequently, she encouraged people to pray the office of Our Lady and to seek refuge in the intercession of the Mother of God. For her, Mary was a perfect example of humility and love. Her deep love for God manifested in her life of penance. Genevieve regularly fasted, often subsisting only on bread and water. Her fasts were not just acts of mortification, but also silent prayers for her community and the world. The life of Genevieve was marked by many miracles. It is said that her prayers healed the sick and that her intercession saved Paris on several occasions. These signs of grace strengthened the faith of the faithful and attracted even more people to the message of the gospel. Despite her fame, Genevieve never sought glory for herself. She attributed all graces to God and lived simply, without ostentation. Her heart was turned towards heaven, and everything she did was for the greater glory of God. Genevieve possessed remarkable wisdom, even without formal education. Her understanding of the scriptures and her ability to counsel were seen as gifts of the Holy Spirit. Many sought her guidance in times of difficulty. Her devotion and love for the church were unwavering. Genevieve made a point of participating in liturgical celebrations and encouraged others to do the same. For her, the Eucharist was the center of Christian life, and her faith in the real presence of Christ in the sacrament was profound. As time passed, Genevieve's health began to decline, but her dedication to prayer and service never waned. Even amidst the pains of old age, she remained faithful to her mission of bringing Christ to others. Her perseverance was admired by all. Genevieve was a woman of great vision. She believed in the power of education and the importance of transmitting the faith to future generations. Therefore, she always encouraged young people to know and love God, ensuring that the gospel continued to be proclaimed. Her life of prayer was intense. Genevieve spent long hours in communion with God, interceding for the city, the church, and the world. Her deep spirituality was accompanied by a serene joy, a reflection of her union with the Lord. Genevieve lived an extraordinary life in her simplicity. Her strength came from her faith, and her determination was fueled by love for God and neighbor. She was a living witness to what it means to be a disciple of Christ, even in difficult times. The fame of Genevieve's holiness spread throughout the region, attracting people seeking consolation, healing, and spiritual guidance. Even those who initially criticized her began to recognize the strength of her faith and the efficacy of her prayers in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. During a period of political and social instability, Genevieve became a voice of balance and courage. Her role as an intercessor was not limited to the spiritual sphere. She was also a skillful mediator, bringing hope and clarity to local leaders. One of her greatest virtues was her ability to unite people around a common purpose. Regardless of their social status, Genevieve treated everyone with dignity and kindness, promoting peace and solidarity among the inhabitants of Paris. Although she faced criticism and mistrust at times, Genevieve never let it affect her. She viewed adversities as opportunities to offer her life as a sacrifice to God, living each moment with unwavering trust in divine providence. The construction of the basilica dedicated to Saint Denis was a milestone in her life. Genevieve worked tirelessly to gather resources and labor for the project, seeing it not just as a building, but as a symbol of God's presence among the Parisians. Genevieve also played a significant role in promoting the devotion to saints. She encouraged the faithful to seek inspiration in their lives and to ask for their intercession, reminding everyone that saints were friends and intercessors before God. In her final years, Genevieve became even more revered. The simplicity and depth of her faith touched everyone who knew her, and her presence was seen as a blessing for Paris. Many people turned to her for blessings and advice. Despite her advanced age, Genevieve continued to fast and practice acts of penance. She offered these sacrifices for the conversion of sinners, for peace in the city, and for the strengthening of the church, always putting others above herself. A notable episode was her intervention during a drought that threatened the livelihood of the population. Genevieve led processions and prayers, and rains soon followed, seen as a divine response to the saint's supplications. Her spiritual leadership was not just formal. She closely followed the suffering of the poorest and most vulnerable. Genevieve was known for visiting the sick and consoling the bereaved, showing that her love for Christ was manifested in each act of charity. Genevieve had a great love for the Word of God. Although she could not read, she memorized the scriptures by listening to them at liturgical celebrations. Her ability to quote passages and apply them to people's lives was impressive and uplifting. Her deep relationship with God was accompanied by mystical gifts. Many people witnessed miracles and healings attributed to her prayers, and Genevieve never claimed any merit for herself, attributing everything to the power of God and the intercession of the saints. Genevieve also had great zeal in defending the city against external threats. During another threat of invasion, she again gathered the community in prayer, conveying courage and confidence to the Parisians who saw her as a spiritual shield. The life of Genevieve was a constant testimony of practical faith. She taught that each Christian had the responsibility to live their faith concretely, loving their neighbor and serving God in all circumstances. Her humility was a striking trait. Even though she was recognized as a spiritual leader, Genevieve never placed herself above others. She preferred to serve rather than be served, reflecting in her life the example of Christ, who came to serve and not to be served. During her lifetime, Genevieve cultivated a deep respect for the clergy and the church hierarchy. She encouraged the faithful to obey their pastors and to trust in the spiritual guidance of those who had been called to serve God. Genevieve's devotion to the Lord's Prayer was remarkable. She saw in this prayer a perfect summary of the gospel and a way to align human will with divine will, and she often taught others to pray it with reverence and love. Genevieve believed in the power of the Christian community united in prayer. She organized vigils and moments of collective intercession, convinced that the strength of communal prayer could transform hearts and even the destinies of cities. Her influence in Paris became so significant that even after her death, her memory continued to inspire generations. The Basilica of Saint-Denis, which she helped build, became a symbol of the unity and faith of the Parisians. In the year 502, already quite debilitated, Genevieve gave up her soul to God. Her death was met with great sadness, but also with profound gratitude for the witness of her life. She had lived extraordinarily, leaving an unparalleled spiritual legacy. Immediately after her death, miracles began to be reported at her tomb. Pilgrims from all over the region came to Paris to pray at the site and ask for her intercession, certain that Genevieve continued to intercede for them before God. The tomb of Genevieve became a place of veneration and pilgrimage. Over time, a church was built in her honor, known as the Church of Saint Genevieve, which became one of the main centers of devotion in France. The canonization of Genevieve took place at a time when the church sought to recognize models of holiness among the laity. Her life of prayer, charity, and spiritual leadership made her a perfect example of what it means to be a witness of Christ in the world. Saint Genevieve was declared the patron saint of Paris, and her liturgical feast began to be celebrated on January 3rd. Each year, her memory was honored with processions and celebrations that highlighted her intercession for the city. Even centuries after her death, devotion to Saint Genevieve remains alive. In times of crisis, Parisians continue to invoke her name, certain that she is a faithful protector and a powerful intercessor before God. After her death, Saint Genevieve became a central figure in the spiritual identity of Paris. Her life of holiness and her example of spiritual leadership solidified her position as the patron saint of the city, and her memory was celebrated with great devotion by the Parisians. One of the most well-known miracles associated with the intercession of Saint Genevieve occurred during the siege of Paris by the Vikings in the 9th century. The inhabitants, terrified, organized processions in her honor, and reports indicate that the city was spared thanks to her prayers. Over time, the veneration of Saint Genevieve spread throughout France. Churches and chapels were dedicated to her, and her story was told as an example of courage, faith, and charity. Her fame crossed the borders of Paris and inspired Christians in other regions. In the 6th century, King Clovis and his wife Queen Clotilde, who had converted to Christianity, promoted the construction of a church in honor of Saint Genevieve. This act marked the beginning of an official devotion to the saint, recognized by both religious and civil authorities. The church dedicated to Saint Genevieve became an important place of pilgrimage. For centuries, faithful from all social classes traveled to Paris to pray at her tomb, seek her intercession, and witness the devotion of the Parisians to their patron saint. In times of plague and other calamities, Parisians turned to the intercession of Saint Genevieve. Solemn processions were organized, carrying her relics through the streets of the city, and reports indicate that the people's faith often resulted in graces and miracles. During the Middle Ages, devotion to Saint Genevieve became even more rooted in Parisian life. Her story was told as a model of feminine holiness and Christian commitment, particularly relevant in an era of great challenges for the Church. The tomb of Saint Genevieve was considered a place of miracles, and many sick people who prayed there reported inexplicable healings. The Church carefully investigated these reports, confirming some of them as signs of the saint's intercession. With the emergence of universities and the cultural flourishing of Paris, the devotion to Saint Genevieve was also promoted by academics and clergy. They recognized her importance as a symbol of the faith that sustained the city. During the Renaissance, the Church of Saint Genevieve was rebuilt, standing out as one of the most beautiful religious buildings in Paris. The place became not only a center of devotion, but also an architectural and cultural landmark. The devotion to Saint Genevieve crossed borders, reaching other countries in Europe. Her story was told in sermons and devotional books, and her life inspired entire communities to trust in divine protection in the face of adversities. In France, Saint Genevieve was often invoked in times of war. Kings and French generals asked for her intercession to protect the nation and ensure victory, recognizing her as a powerful defender of the homeland. During the French Revolution, the Church of Saint Genevieve was transformed into the Pantheon of Paris, a secular monument dedicated to historical figures of France. Although the saint's relics were removed, her memory remained alive among the faithful. Even in times of secularization, devotion to Saint Genevieve never completely disappeared. The faithful continued to celebrate her feast on January 3rd, and many still invoked her as an intercessor and patron saint of Paris. In the 19th century, a movement of spiritual renewal in France brought renewed interest in the life of Saint Genevieve. Catholic writers and historians highlighted her historical and spiritual importance, reviving her devotion in a modern context. During World War II, Parisians once again invoked Saint Genevieve to protect their city. Although Paris suffered from occupation and war, many attributed the survival of the city to her ongoing intercession. The example of Saint Genevieve continues to be an inspiration for Christian women worldwide. Her spiritual leadership and courage in times of crisis show that holiness can be lived in any state of life, even in challenging contexts. Devotion to the patron saint of Paris is especially alive among the poor and marginalized, who see in Saint Genevieve a friend and protector. Her life of charity and service is a model of how to live the gospel in everyday life. In modern times, Saint Genevieve is remembered as a woman of great faith and action. Her story is a reminder that true strength comes from God, and that, with trust and prayer, it is possible to face any challenge. In many parishes of Paris, annual celebrations still gather the faithful to honor the memory of Saint Genevieve. Processions, solemn masses, and moments of community prayer are organized, highlighting her continued relevance in the life of the Church. St. Genevieve is also a symbol of hope for the unity of the Church. Her ability to unite people around the faith is an example of how Christians can overcome divisions and work together for the common good. The message of St. Genevieve remains profoundly relevant. In a world often marked by anxiety and fear, her testimony of faith reminds us of the importance of trusting in God and placing our future in His hands. Her life is often presented as a model for young Catholics, especially those seeking a greater purpose in their lives. Genevieve demonstrates that it is possible to live fully for God, even amid the concerns of the world. St. Genevieve is also remembered as a tireless advocate for the most vulnerable. Her dedication to the poor and the sick is an invitation for all Christians to take up their role as instruments of mercy in the world. In times of crisis, St. Genevieve continues to be invoked as a faithful intercessor. Her life of prayer and courage is an inspiration for those facing seemingly insurmountable challenges, showing that God never abandons His children. The memory of St. Genevieve is not just a celebration of her holiness, but also a reminder of the transformative power of Christian faith. Her life demonstrated how trust in God can illuminate even the darkest moments. Throughout the centuries, artists and writers have perpetuated the story of St. Genevieve in paintings, stained glass, and books. Her image is often depicted with a torch or candle, symbolizing the light of faith that she brought to Paris and to the world. In modern times, the spirituality of St. Genevieve is a reminder that holiness is not a call reserved for a few, but a universal invitation. She teaches us that by living fully for God, we can positively impact the lives of others. In Paris, various streets, schools, and institutions bear the name of St. Genevieve, highlighting her continued presence in the culture and history of the city. Her figure is a bridge between the past and the present, inspiring new generations. The devotion to St. Genevieve is a source of unity among Christians from different traditions. Her example of prayer, charity, and leadership resonates with all who seek to live the gospel in its fullness. In her artistic representations, St. Genevieve is often shown as a woman in prayer, reflecting her life of communion with God. These images serve as an invitation for us also to draw closer to the Lord in all circumstances. During the liturgical celebrations in honor of St. Genevieve, the faithful particularly remember her trust in divine providence. This unwavering trust is a powerful lesson for those facing uncertainties in their lives. St. Genevieve is also a model of spiritual leadership for women in the Church. She showed that even in a patriarchal society, faith and courage can pave the way for women to play significant roles in the life of the Christian community. Her intercession continues to be sought by the faithful facing personal or community crises. Whether in times of drought, plague, or war, St. Genevieve is remembered as a source of hope and protection. The life of St. Genevieve shows that saints are not distant from human difficulties. She faced opposition, criticism, and challenges with the same courage that the faithful are called to have in their own contexts. In the contemporary context, St. Genevieve is also seen as an advocate for social justice. Her dedication to the poor and vulnerable inspires charity and service initiatives in today's Christian communities. The relics of St. Genevieve, although partially destroyed during the French Revolution, continue to be venerated by the faithful in Paris. They are a tangible symbol of her ongoing spiritual presence among the people. The Basilica of Sainte Geneviève, now the Pantheon, remains a significant landmark in Paris. Although it has become a secular monument, its history as a place of prayer and veneration for the saint is a testimony to her enduring importance. St. Genevieve is often invoked by students and young people seeking guidance. Her wisdom and determination are seen as qualities that can inspire those facing the challenges of the modern world. The spirituality of St. Genevieve emphasizes the balance between action and contemplation. She teaches us that prayer should always lead to practical charity and that serving others is an expression of love for God. Even in her human frailty, St. Genevieve demonstrated that God's grace is sufficient to overcome all limitations. Her life is proof that holiness is achieved not by the absence of difficulties, but by fidelity in the midst of them. St. Genevieve is a reminder that prayer has the power to change not only hearts, but also external circumstances. Her confidence in the efficacy of intercession is an example for all Christians seeking to live a life of authentic faith. In times of increasing secularization, the story of St. Genevieve is a powerful witness to the lasting impact of faith. She invites us not to underestimate the transformative power of a life lived for God. For many, St. Genevieve is a sign that God chooses ordinary people to perform extraordinary works. Her simplicity and humility are an inspiration for those who believe they lack special talents to serve the Lord. The Feast of St. Genevieve is a time of spiritual renewal for the city of Paris. It unites the faithful in prayer and celebration, reminding them of the central role of faith in the life of the community. In the modern world, St. Genevieve is also seen as a patron saint against fear. Her courage in times of crisis is a powerful example for those facing anxieties and uncertainties in their lives. Her life was a testimony to how the grace of God operates in everyday life. St. Genevieve lived among the people, sharing their pains and hopes, and showed that holiness can be lived in all contexts. The devotion to St. Genevieve continues to grow in communities around the world. She is remembered as a woman of profound faith, whose life was dedicated entirely to the service of God and neighbor. St. Genevieve remains an example of how faith can illuminate and transform an entire city. Her life is an invitation for all Christians to live with courage, compassion, and trust in divine providence. At every moment of her life, St. Genevieve was a reflection of God's love. Her memory continues to inspire the faithful to follow her example, trusting that with divine grace it is possible to face any adversity and live fully for Christ.